Well, hello again. Today I'm making the spinach pie, Greek Spanakopita, and I'm more or less, as much as I ever do, following the recipe I found at finecooking.com. I tend to not measure things exactly and all that, but I am more or less following their recipe, except they called to add dill, which I have never heard of, and I don't have any fresh dill, so I decided not to do that. And they did not mention adding the roasted pine nuts, which I think are fabulous. So I went ahead and roasted those, and I'll be adding those. I already very briefly boiled the spinach, and then ran cold water over it to cool it down, squeezed the water out of it, and roughly chopped it. This is probably about 2 pounds of spinach. And I did leave some of the stems on. There really wasn't a lot of that in the bag. And so anyway, the first half or so, I messed with trying to cut off every stem of every leaf. And then I just decided that life is too short for that. So after the water was squeezed out, I just rough chopped it. And I'm gonna pick this up. The recipe called for about 10 green onions, and I only had 2. So I chopped those up tiny. The recipe said to saute them in olive oil before you add them. I don't see the reason, considering that I'm only using the 2, and they're diced tiny, and the whole thing's gonna go in the oven. The recipe called for, trying to see what I'm showing you, there we go, called for 1/3 cup of fine chopped fresh parsley. I haven't measured that, but I decided that's how much I was going to use. They called for, easier to pick this up, they called for 1/2 cup of grated Parmesan cheese. Now, in terms of Parmigiano Reggiano, that's a big ticket item. So I had this with a little bit of Parmesan, a little bit of Pecorino Romano, and a little bit of shredded mozzarella. So I've decided all of that is going in. I looked around the internet, lots of recipes, they call for all different kind of cheeses to go into this stuff. So I figure anything goes. Anyway, so I'm about to make the filling. I've laid down, I don't know, the recipe said to lay down 9 sheets, and you know, it's very easy to lose track. So no idea what I'm showing you, I'm sorry. Anyway, so I have prepared however much that's gonna go under the filling. And now I'm just gonna put the filling together, and then I'll continue layering so that I can like show what you do. There's nothing really hard about this, but it is super time consuming. And the phyllo dough, which is this stuff, you buy it frozen, you have to thaw it overnight, you have to set it out to come up to room temperature. You have to briefly boil the spinach and then wait for it to cool. and so on. So there's like a lot of kind of plates in the air, if you're familiar with that phrase. Okay, so 2 eggs, lightly beaten. I'm gonna salt the egg. Salt and pepper. For that. It's a Himalayan pink salt. The recipe calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. And while I do have the capacity to freshly grate nutmeg, I don't really have a way to measure that. So there you go. That's a 1/4 teaspoon of someone else grated it nutmeg. It's like we can either have exactly the amount the recipe calls for, or I can fresh grate it, but I don't see how I can do both. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the parsley to the egg mixture. And I'm gonna add this little bit of green onion. Ooh, that looks really awful. Okay, well that got a lot of this stuff up out of the way. So, well, maybe I'll put the cheeses in. Like I said, I'm just dumping all this, whatever's in here is going in. It said 10 ounces, about 2 cups of crumbled feta. So this is the crumbled feta that I bought. This is, it says, net weight 24 ounces. So I would think a little less than half of this. You can always add more if I think it needs it. Okay. Should be fairly easy to incorporate. Everything but the spinach is what I'm thinking. Oh, the spinach is behaving nicely because of that rough chop. That's good. And I have my phyllo dough under this towel to keep it moist. I don't remember ever making spinach pie before, but I've made baklava. And the thing I remember most vividly, it was a long time ago, but the thing I remember most vividly is as you go along, the phyllo dough becomes dried out and it becomes more and more difficult to work with. I think the last layer I put in, I realized as it was touching down into the oil that I actually had 2 pieces of the dough, which I've seen recipes that tell you to make it that way. So I figure that's not the end of the world. That I missed putting the olive oil on one layer. I mean, it wasn't intentional. It wouldn't be my preference, but I think it'll be okay. So my pan is a little bit smaller than what this recipe calls for. They said, I'm just trying to get the rest of the egg out of this bowl. They said 9 by 13. That is a size I don't own. This thing is, I think, about 7.5 by maybe 10 and change, or 11. So I figure that's gonna mess things up a little bit right off the bat. Like, this seems like an awful lot of filling for the size container I have there. I might end up having to roll some individuals. If you've ever seen them, like individually rolled in little triangles, which is more work than doing a pan. Alright, I think that'll do. It's not perfect, but I think it'll be okay. Anyway, I considered using a lot less spinach, but I did want to make sure that I had a thick layer. This is definitely too much for this pan. My daughter orders this all the time if we go out for lunch. And it comes to her with not a lot of filling. Suppose there's a, you know, for a restaurant's concern, they have to worry about remaining profitable, not putting in too much expensive ingredient or whatever. I don't think spinach is all that expensive, but I don't know. And they're definitely generous with the feta cheese on their Greek salad, so I don't know. Maybe it's just, you know, how they prefer it. So that's an awful lot of leftover of the filling. And then I didn't mix in the pine nuts because I wanted to make sure that they got distributed throughout, so that every every piece of this pie will have some pine nuts, as opposed to, you know, one piece gets 10 and another piece gets none. I bought these at Walmart, and I think the most expensive place I found when I was looking for the pine nuts was our local store, similar to Whole Foods, and they were at, I think, $37 a pound. Walmart and Target each offer small packages. Let me grab it and show you. This is Walmart. 4 ounces was about $5, and it did work out to about $20 a pound. Okay, so this would probably be the trickiest layer, where the advice is to oil this before it touches the filling. So that I can oil both sides, and I think that's supposed to help keep the dough from getting soggy. Although I don't think being on top of this is going to make it soggy, but I suppose it could if I didn't drain out enough of the water. Yeah, that wasn't so bad. Okay, beautiful. So the glue that holds the sheets of this dough together is, in this case, this is my good olive oil. You can also use butter. If this were baklava, you would definitely be using butter. But in savory dishes, I guess, olive oil is more common. But it is a lot of olive oil, so it's important that it be an oil that you like the taste of. It's not going anywhere. I don't know if I made baklava more than once, but I do remember the first, I must have. But I do remember the first time I made it, I didn't use enough butter. And this phyllo dough is like cardboard if it doesn't have enough of some kind of a fat. Okay, so this is my unfiltered Italian olive oil. Ding, cheers. Okay, now this next sheet is the more normal way to assemble phyllo dough. You put it down dry, you stick it to the oil or butter. From the previous layer. Can you see how this got a little folded up? That like really has to get straightened up, or by the time I come back for that next sheet, it might be very messed up. This towel is a little bit damp, and the dough is under a sheet of plastic that it came wrapped in the package. So these parts that are sticking up are basically pretty dry as far as, you know, the oil. This part here. And they're also becoming brittle because they're drying out, you know, being in the open air. So I'm probably going to trim a lot of that off rather than try to fold it in, as most recipes suggest. Because you know, it doesn't have any value. There's no reason to create edges that don't taste as good as the rest of it. I'll just scissor it off and throw it in the wastebasket. Oh, the other thing I didn't realize when I bought the dough was that, like, I'm only working with half of that package. I was like, $3.74, I think was the price. It's like, man, that's a lot of money. Well, because it was twice as much dough as I was thinking it was. So the price is not so bad. Okay, so this layer has been well oiled. And it's pretty much stuck to the previous layer. You can see kind of a bubble here. That's okay. I don't know why those happen, but they do. Probably this part where it's very hard to set it down in exactly the right place. It's a little bit like hanging wallpaper, if you've ever done that. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going like that. Finish it off, and then I think it takes... Oh, I don't know that I wrote it down. I think it says that it takes about 30 minutes. I think it said about 30 minutes at 375. I have a convection oven, which I set at 350, and it'll probably be more like 20 or 25 minutes. And then I guess if there's anything to say of interest after it's finished, maybe I'll make a part 2, or maybe post a picture to Instagram. But this isn't, you know, I think it doesn't actually look like much. It's all a matter of the taste. And I like it. My daughter seems to be kind of over the top in love with it. And I'm pretty sure that it freezes well. She already has been here today, and she's at work now, so I'll probably cut it up into serving size portions, put it in plastic bags, and freeze it. Then if she wants to show up for dinner sometime during the week, this is what she'll have, or I'll give it to her maybe next Saturday if she's in the mood for it. Okay, I'm going to show it to you one more time. It doesn't actually, doesn't actually change appearance as you add the layers, other than the fact that, this messy stuff. And like I said, I'm just going to cut that off with my kitchen scissors and, tuck in a small quantity of it. Like the parts that are pretty well oiled should be fine, but these parts up top that are completely dry, like it just breaks right off if you touch it. Let's see if I can, this is a little bit wetter than that. There we go. Anyway, so I'm going to keep doing this, and then I'm going to bake it, and we'll see if there's something for a part 2, or maybe just a still photo. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.